Well, hello and welcome to today's principal panel discussion about harnessing technology to keep schools operational over the last 12 months of COVID-19. My name is Lachlan James. I'm the head of marketing for Operoo, and I'm just quickly introducing the session before I throw it over to our hosts. Now, before we get started properly, just a little bit of housekeeping. As attendees, you're all set to mute to help with the audio quality. We have a really large audience in today, which is fantastic. However, if you do have a question during the webinar, there is a question box in the corner of your screen. So please enter your questions into that box and we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation and follow up afterwards if we do happen to run short on time. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Peter.
Thanks, Lachlan. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Benzavanger. I am the president of Operoo. It's great to be here today, especially among all the New York City folks. I am from New York City, as you can probably tell, and I was a former New York City educator for 16 years and had the pleasure of working with Phil Weinberg and a lot of the principal panelists today. And what I would like to just really start off from just a little bit about Operoo, and then I'm going to pass it over to Phil to actually run the session. So first, want to thank you. We know we have a lot of educators on here today. The work that you have been doing over the last year has been amazing just to watch, being part of working with New York City schools over this last 2 years and seeing this last year just how New York City has rallied around to really support their community and their teachers and their students. And it's just been amazing to watch. So really just to get started, just to on year one on COVID, just the virtual school operations, just to really go through some of the topics that we'll be discussing today with our panelists: virtual school operations, staff processes and workflows, how parent engagement has changed, staying connected to school life, mitigating the health risks and managing the equity and access for all students. It's been a really big issue, and moving forward for game changes and challenges. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Operoo, and I'm going to then pass it off to Phil to really get started on the panel discussion. Our mission is really to empower schools to use every minute and every dollar possible on the student education and really wasting resources on operational inefficiencies. The first company I founded was called Datacation, which is People Path and Scheduler. And, really that focused on the academics. And when leaving there and going and doing the next venture, in starting Operoo, we really took an approach of saying, how can we help schools with all the back office? These principal leaders and assistant principals and teachers have to manage so much paperwork and so many workflows. It really becomes a problem. We started really Operoo to really help support these New York City workflows. The back office managing registration. One of the things that we have done in looking at process automation and workflow management for schools, we did a case study last year on actually how 6 elementary schools across all 5 boroughs manage their online registration process using Operoo. Just when all of a sudden everything shut down and you still had to register kids in New York City, you had so many forms to complete, so many communications that had to be delivered, and Operoo really came there to make sure we looked at 3 things. One, are we being equitable, right? We know that when you're starting to deliver forms and they're PDFs and they have to be done on a computer, most of our families are really doing the work on their cell phone to make sure that we delivered that information on their cell phone. Everything from consent forms to field trip management, payments, multi-language communications. All 3 became really important for us to deliver it on their cell phone, translate it into a language, and then put it into the official DOE format so we could submit it. And this became really powerful to schools to manage all their back-end workflows, everything from per-session timesheets to requests for supplies to parents on getting approval or consent or filling out the blue card or the student registration form. So many different workflows for parents and staff. We wanted to make sure that we could help manage those efficiencies at schools. Now, I'm lucky enough to work with these 6 great leaders and really learning from them on what New York City needed, and currently working with over 275 New York City schools and hundreds of districts across the country to really help workflow management at that administrative level. and we're fortunate to be able to work with such educational partners as we assist them in becoming more operationally efficient. And today, we have these leaders on to really talk about, what happened over this last year and using technology to transform to that work. So I'm really fortunate right now to turn it over to Phil Weinberg, who is the former Deputy Chancellor of Teaching and Learning for New York City, is currently the senior partner at quill.org, to really go through today's session and see how these amazing leaders have been working through the problems of COVID and just operational inefficiencies even prior to COVID. So excited about this session. And Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Peter. And it's really great to be here with so many old friends. I'm truly honored to be part of this gathering of educators who are looking to find ways to better serve their students at a time when our schools need more support than ever. I mean, it goes without saying it's been an unimaginable year. And from where I sit, there aren't words to express the gratitude I feel for all that the folks who are gathered here today have done and are continuing to do for our schools. You guys have demonstrated flexibility, to say the least, kindness, selflessness, and the ability to experiment and learn on the go. And that leads us to why we're here today, to listen to an extraordinary group of principals talk to us about how they cared for their communities this year, what they learned, and what they are thinking about as we move forward. Because as difficult as this year has been, it would be tragic if we didn't commit to sharing what we've learned with each other. And that's what we aim to do today. Peter highlighted for you the topics we're going to cover. I'm really lucky to be joined by Deirdre DeAngelis, Karen DeTola, Mark Erlenwein, Tiffany Hicks, Moses Ojeda, and Trish Peterson. I have the honor of asking them a few questions, and the first time they respond, they'll introduce themselves and their school. So let's start. The first topic is about virtual school operations and the way that operating schools during COVID-19 has forced educators to adapt fast. There have been so many new challenges that need to implement repeatable online processes and workflows. The question is, how did you enable staff to complete these kinds of required tasks, which are key to the day-to-day running of a school while working remotely? And maybe Karen, could we start with you?
Hi everyone. I'm Karen DeTola. I'm the principal at Mark Twain Intermediate School in Coney Island, Brooklyn. And I'm happy to be back and very grateful to Peter and Aparu and all the folks for really providing us with a tremendous service. Who would have known, right, Peter, when you were in my office taking my binders to go through all of those papers and see how we can operationalize this system. And it couldn't have come at a better time if there's something positive to say about what has happened over the past year. And so having Aparu and IO available to me and my staff virtually anywhere and everywhere really has made this manageable. So for example, having the ability to manage the groups in Aparu to send out notifications for close contacts, communicating out to staff and families about what is happening and next steps, because everyone has quite a different level of anxiety around all of this, and you never want it to be perceived that there is a delay that could have been avoided. So particularly around COVID communications, Aparu and IO has just been a godsend. And so immediately folks were able to operationalize those communications and get that out. And actually, right before this call, that's what we were doing, unfortunately, still. So that was one major takeaway and a key in order to keep everyone on the same page and feeling safe and secure that we're going to get the communication out and we're going to know what we need to do the next day. You know, are students coming? Are they not coming? Are staff members coming? You know, who had potentially been affected. So this was just really something that I couldn't imagine having to do without having the quick clicking and the quick access anytime in any place. So very grateful for that. So that day-to-day communication around COVID. And then one last thing, day-to-day communication, quick decision-making around things like graduation and collecting fees for things that we didn't know when we would be doing it, if we would be doing it. So we were literally able to get a link up, get things done when we got the go ahead to have certain events. And so that's actually happening right now as I speak. So I couldn't imagine, once again, trying to operationalize things like that during a time like this, when there's limited access to families and turnaround time is very tight. So extremely helpful. And actually, I don't even know if we could do the great things that we're planning for our seniors and actually even our lower grades without these systems. So those are some ways that they really have changed the way we do business here and have made the business now that we have to do here possible.
Thanks, Karen. Moses, could we turn to you here?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Moses Ojeda, principal of Thomas Edison CT High School in Jamaica, Queens. Happy to be here, and I reflect on the first time we did this almost about a year ago, how key it was for us to share out. So excited to be here to continue to share out with our colleagues. So thank you for hosting this. As I reflect, as we're moving forward, as how we handled this, we basically allowed our teachers, students, administration just to sit at the table and process where we were going to go. I'm thankful for Aparu, a lot of the things that we transitioned to collect forms or to even establish a method to be able to get our computers that we use for CTE to the homes of students, because the devices provided by DOE or the devices that we had, which were Chromebooks, were not sufficient enough. They didn't have the requirements needed to run some of the software that we run for our graphic arts department, for our architectural departments. So we actually had to take those computers in the labs and track them as to where they were going. And so that was a tremendous help because we were able to create that form, but also to create virtual trips, right? We also used Aparu for that to keep us on track as to making sure that our kids were followed along the process, whether they were remote or in person. So thankful to the partnerships that stepped up, but I really think I'm grateful for the committee we created. We created a remote learning committee, and they took on the concerns. It's comprised of lead teachers that were selected by the departments. We sat down virtually with administration and students, and we heard the voices of all stakeholders and their struggles. And in doing that, we were able to come up with processes that would help us. And we also adopted a mindset of constant change. That's the only thing we could count on, is that it would change. And so once we adopted that mindset, as we implemented and things were out there, we saw that we had to tweak certain things and modify until we perfected the process. And so again, with that mindset, people felt less anxiety, less stress. And I got to tell you, we're at a place now where things are flowing nicely, right? There are things that come up here and there, but nothing major. And I'll leave with this. I think about the fact that we're in spring, and a colleague of mine, the other day we were having a discussion, said to me, we should think about spring cleaning. At this moment in time, think about the processes that you're going to adopt long-term and which ones will you be getting rid of. Like, start planning now. What worked? What didn't work? So I leave people with that because, again, I see us moving into a future where the hybrid learning model is here to stay for a while. Thank you.
Thanks, Moses. The only thing we can count on is that it would change. That rings true. Mark, could you add anything to this part of the discussion?
Surely. Hi, Phil. Thank you. My name is Mark Erlenwine. I'm the principal of Staten Island Technical High School in Staten Island, New York, serving students from all 5 boroughs in New York City as one of New York City's 8 specialized high schools. And having known Peter for so long, he's just always been a visionary of knowing just what the field of education, educators, and schools need next before they even knew or know that they need it. And once again, Peter proved to be way ahead of anyone's thought process as to where we needed to be before the pandemic came about. So being an early adopter of Aparu was truly pivotal. I'm so thankful and grateful to be among these thought partners and having made that decision early on, because it truly was a defining point for us. And I think we've all heard many different types of stories over the past year, and being able to quantify the gaps and the voids And who we've lost touch with over the course of the year is a real concern, it's a real challenge, and it's a real problem that schools have to face. And just to add to what Moses and Karen have shared already, I think one of the key features of Operoo is literally from day one on the pandemic, we were able to access students' emergency blue cards remotely from a telephone or a computer. It didn't matter where. Didn't matter that all 100 of our staff were on 100 different offices spread out all over New Jersey, Staten Island, and Brooklyn. The information was at a finger's touch. But a key and critical point, like other schools that used Operoo, we've used this to acquire anywhere from attendance information and to ask an assortment of all sorts of different types of questions that the Department of Ed asked of us to ask of our parents and students. And when you do that, one of the key features of Operoo is you can send out questions and surveys to specific groups. The way that Operoo interfaces with, if you're using IO Education's Classroom, it interfaces with STARS, and it interfaces with the New York City Department of Ed computer systems. So any of our groups that we had programmed into the system, Operoo is smart in allowing us just to select those particular students. And one of the key and critical features that have been vital all throughout is it lets you know who has not responded. And that's not an out-of-the-box feature that you get using some of the Google products or some of the mainstay products that we've all been trying to use if you didn't have Operoo. But Operoo always told you which students didn't respond to a survey. So nobody was left behind along the way. And it was really very simple and easy to always identify who we didn't ask for. And leading up, one last point, just leading up right into this very past week, when we had to, we were asked once again by the Department of Ed to ask our students who would like to come to school 5 days a week. Rather than sending that survey out to all of the students, all we had to do was select the group of students who are blended learners versus bombarding parents and students with unnecessary communications. Because in this age of COVID, over communicating when you didn't need to could be just as much of a problem, because eventually people just start tuning out to what you're saying. So I can't be more grateful of having had this tool and been a part of this movement. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And it's important to remember that what an essential job it is to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind, even in a virtual world. And actually that brings us to parent and family engagement, because we know that strong parent participation and community engagement are key drivers of student success. So I'd ask, what communications methods and practices have allowed you guys to keep school communities up to date as circumstances keep changing? And how have you kept parents engaged in the learning process and made certain that they've been heard throughout this crisis? Deirdre, could we start with you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deirdre DeAngelis. I am the principal of New Dorp High School in Staten Island. We are a very large high school, 3,200 students, over 330 staff members. So it's a small city to run. And in this world of remote learning, we don't have 100 different offices like Mark. We have 330 plus offices like Mark. And I was extremely thankful for my ongoing conversations with Peter, as well as the support we received from the staff of Operoo. Any question, any advice, any new ideas that we came up with, they were on board to listening to and helping us brainstorm around how we can use Operoo. But I do need to mention here, because I know a lot of our colleagues are out there, and I know Moses mentioned the fact that today is about sharing and talking through some of what has transpired in the last 13, 14 months. And if it wasn't for the support of our colleagues throughout the city, speaking to one another, sharing, even those days where we wanted to cry and scream, we at least had the support of all our colleagues throughout the city. So I really need to mention that. And to say that everything happens for a reason, and anyone who really knows me, I say that a lot. Not that we ever wanted this to happen, but I think what it has done is forced us to really evaluate and reassess practices, instruction, and communication the way it existed. And some of those changes that we've been forced to make will really make life more efficient, more reliable going forward. So some of the areas in terms of parent and community and family contact, yeah, I know it's been mentioned a number of times, but how important it was to have those blue cards for communication and follow-up. And one of the huge pieces, besides the COVID consents and the close contacts that were made to parents on a regular basis, at New Dorp, we have a school-based health center. And because of COVID, we had the number of enrollments had decreased. Our senior class had graduated, our new class came in. We did not have a face-to-face orientation. We did have a remote orientation, but it wasn't the same. So our enrollment in the health center had dropped, and that could mean we could lose the center. And using Aparu, we were able to, oh my goodness, really increase the number of enrolled students in a matter of 3 or 4 days from the release of all the paperwork that went with applying to be a member of the school health center. And that opened the doors for so many of our students to keep up with all of their health concerns, you know, in terms of just, you know, regular visits to the doctors or the nurse practitioners. So that made life so much greater. But I think one of the most welcomed features, and again, working through it with Aparu, was the management of our open school conferences, our parent-teacher conferences that we utilized Aparu to do, where our parents actually was sent an invite from the teachers, and it outlined all of the timeframes that they can sign up to meet with that teacher. And then a report was printed for our teachers to just literally sit there with the phone numbers in front of them and actually in those timeframes call the parents and convey information that was vital for a parent to have about the progress their child was making or the lack of, and what supports might be in place. So going forward, I can't imagine not using the practices and the procedures that we put in place with Aparu, even when we do come back, because we saved a tremendous amount of time, money, paper. And again, to go back, and I just have to say it one more time, the accuracy and the reliability has increased and improved a tremendous amount. And as a high school, we don't backpack our forms and letters, or if we do, we know they never get in the hands of the parents like that of the elementary schools. So now sending those form letters out, opt out for military, clearinghouse opt out, you know, the media consent forms, all of those forms, if they're now signed, they're more legitimate, instead of just thinking that parent didn't sign it, so they're opting in. But that parent probably never saw it. So again, I don't think we could go backwards.
Thanks, Deirdre. And Tiffany, could you talk to us about how you manage parent and family engagement?
Yes, hi, my name is Tiffany Hicks. I'm the principal of the Walter Francis Bishop Magnet School of the Arts, PS 160 in District 28. Hey, Moses, we're here together. I would say primarily what we had always used was Class Dojo, and that was like my main communication method. So when COVID, the pandemic first hit, and then we were home, I was, you know, messaging parents daily, every morning, good morning, recording videos, posting those videos, letting them know that, you know, even though we were all apart, we were still together in some way, shape, or form. And then after a while, you know, the novelty of everybody's home and digital devices and wow, I can see you, that started to wear off. So we had to come up with another way. So messages stopped being checked. We stopped getting, the response rate. So we saw how many people viewed it, but then the next step of the action wasn't taken after that. So I think it would have been very easy for me to say, parents are overwhelmed. They're just, everybody's trying to stay abreast. We're trying to thrive. And I could have gave up and not thought of another way to kind of make these connections. And then Aparu came along, and that just kind of changed the game for us completely. So we started using Aparu a little bit late, and especially for registration, because we had all of these pre-K and kindergarten students that I had set up in Class Dojo, and I was trying to message the parents through there, but then I couldn't get them in. We couldn't record order devices for them because they hadn't had an ID number yet. I couldn't set them up with an account. So we were like, we have to do something different. So once we started to onboard them, we had current information. I heard my colleagues say that, which is so important, because we were calling phone numbers and 4, 5, 6 phone calls, and they were all the wrong number. So to be able to get in contact, which is the first step, in order for me to communicate, I have to reach you. So to be able to actually reach the parent on the other end to share information was really important. My teachers, we also were using like Google Sites to have information. So we're trying to have the same information in multiple spaces. We started like a social media team. So we're on Instagram. So wherever a parent is, I feel like I have to meet you where you are. And one thing that I found was that parents were checking my dojo messages at midnight. So it's not healthy, and I'm not telling anybody to do this, but I was responding at that time. When I saw the message pop up, I was responding because I needed answers to questions, and I needed to be able to get them. So if this is when you are available, then I tried to make myself available for that. Now we're doing, a lot of town halls, and even though parents can't make it, one thing that we started to do was I would use like Canva or Loom and like do the presentation and record it and have it posted, because parents said like, even if I can't make it, it is something that I will watch after the fact. So I definitely started to do that, and it made me feel better, because if you spend hours like trying to do these presentations and then you have 10 parents show up, it is such like a heartbreak. But to know that I got the views on it and they saw it and they kind of know the information, then that definitely helps. So again, I think just being accessible to families, making sure, that they are heard, and you try to like implement some of the suggestions or answer their questions in a timely manner. I think that is something that we've done really well to help everyone stay connected.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. It is worth pointing out that all the ways in which we can contact people may put an added strain on principals. It may not be healthy sometimes, and just for our own well-being to keep that in mind. But Trish, can you add to the family and parent engagement conversation?
Sure, thank you, Phil. My name is Trish Peterson, and I'm the principal of PS8 in District 13, Brooklyn. We have 595 K through 5 children, and we'll be coming back to school 5 days a week later this month. Aparu has been critical in communicating with families. And I would say that now that we don't have on-site meetings in our school library or auditorium, everything is via Zoom, Aparu has been the connection. So I'm able to have a meeting and then follow up with an Aparu survey. Right now, we're actually soliciting volunteers as we move kindergartners into a new class for the remaining 9 weeks of the school year. We've been able to use Aparu for forms, as my colleague stated, for enrollment, and anytime we have a new DOE form that has to be used, and we're gathering information. So it's been really critical. In addition to how great the system is, Lachlan and Peter and Sam and the team have just been there every step of the way, which has been amazing. This is kind of jumping back to the previous question, but we've also started, because this year so many of my staff members were remote, including my school secretary, attendance had to be done in a completely different way. So we use roll call on a daily basis, and it's so easy to add a new staff member to any Aparu group so that attendance can be taken, whether it's remotely or in person, and then it gets to our remote secretary immediately for the actual inputting of attendance to Central. So Aparu has just been really critical in terms of communicating with the community at large, as well as staff that are here and remote.
That's great, Trish. Thank you. And Karen, any final thoughts on this topic?
Hi. Yes, just a few things I'd like to add on a fun note. So coming into middle school is a tough transition for all kids, and this year COVID made it even more of a challenge because these families have really never had the experience of being in our school other than when they tested for us or attended an open house. So really difficult for our sixth grade kids, families, and teachers to get to know each other. And our Parents Association, I have to give them a shout out, along with our parent coordinator, really worked hard to try and fill in that void by doing events like Meet and Mingle virtually. And so the way that we were able to notify families was with Aparu and the groups that we've created. And then another piece, keeping kids and families engaged about all the great things that were happening out there in the virtual world and in-person world, was through our weekly newsletter that we send out. And that also goes out through Aparu, and people really wait for it. They know it's coming Friday or the end of a school week, and they can really catch up and get a sort of a laundry list of what's happening and what they need to do in order to be there and support their kids. So those things are really important, especially when you're transitioning into a new school and you don't know anyone. So I'm very grateful and thankful to all the people here that made it happen, and for your systems for allowing it to be easy and simple.
That's great, Karen. Thank you. I'm going to turn to what's probably the toughest question on the list, which is about mitigating health risks. And it's a really hard question. I doubt we're ever going to find a perfect solution here. And frankly, we don't run hospitals. But let's talk about the processes and practices that have been used to monitor and report and therefore mitigate COVID-19 transmission throughout your school communities. I mean, it seems clear to me that this work easily could have become a full-time job, and I'll bet that on many days it felt like it was one. So how have you created and systematized your approach to this issue of health management so that the bulk of the school can remain focused on learning while you're still taking care of this gigantic new responsibility? Mark, why don't we begin with you?
Sure. So interestingly enough, yesterday was the first day we actually had to close. Actually, today was the first day we had to close a classroom due to a positive COVID test. So we've made it this far into the school year without having that challenge. And I guess in terms of mitigating and trying to avoid this from happening, while that's impossible to do, I'd like to think that some of the things that we had planned and implemented kept us going this long, trying to create a safer environment. So like one of the ways that we did that was we converted our 9-period day to a 3-period day block schedule. And we split the full school day into 2 halves. The morning 3 periods were taught in person, and then the teachers in the afternoon would teach their same classes that they taught in the morning to the remote kids. So by doing that and having less periods per day in combination with podding students, ultimately our very first positive case that we had to do the contact tracing yesterday, all in all only impacted 8 students and 3 faculty members, which thankfully they're fully vaccinated, so they don't have to quarantine. So minimizing the amount of contact that all the students had with one another and just limiting it to 3 periods per day, in the long run has gotten us this far. That's not to say that something else could have, caused a positive reaction and made it difficult for us. But when we finally had to do all the contact tracing, having systems in place that very easily discern through a student roster who was blended, who was remote, and then who was actually in the building yesterday, and then pulling the attendance system into the mix to identify who was present and blended and in the building yesterday, has made this process a lot more doable than some of the nightmares I've heard over the course of the year. So I'll chalk some of this up to luck and being fortunate, but I think also the way in which we approach this early on helped mitigate some of the many problems and the endless hours on the phone with the Situation Room trying to do contact and tracing with your school community.
Thanks, Mark. And Deirdre, it's a really tough question, but is there anything that you could add here?
Well, it is a very, very tough question, especially in a school where we had 6 of those cases just last week. So we do not have the luck that Mark has. We have been very lucky in the cases that where there was a positive case, there was no transmission to another individual in the building. We've had a number of cases throughout this year as we open and close and close and open. What we have seen, of course, are patterns that follow holidays or weeks where students are on vacation and then they come back positive. So as we proceeded, we've, even in the remote world, we've had probably, I believe, 260 or so cases in total throughout the building, staff and students. And so in order to gather the information that myself or my assistant principal of security needs when we call in the cases to the situation room, there's a whole list of questions that we are asked regularly. And having those questions in a survey that goes out to the parents or the staff members or even the students if they're completing it themselves makes life much easier on this end. Again, back to what Mark said, the gathering of information and the sharing of information during this very tight turnaround time of getting information to the Department of Health or to Test and Trace is super important. So, and then being able, the flexibility of changing that. So just this week, adding the questions are, which are, have you been vaccinated fully? And are you in any way connected as a player or a coach to any PSAL sports? Those are all new questions. So adding it to the surveys and sharing that with the community, streamline that practice. As we look ahead to probably what will be a blended summer where we try to get as many students in person as possible, there's an important gathering of information that has to happen, such as health alerts, immunizations, COVID-19 consents, and of course, to continue to enroll students in the school health center. That information is going to be vital, especially in a building that has probably over 700 IEP students and quite a number of autistic students, where communication is key because families have to really prepare our students that are not as flexible in their thinking when school is going to close or open, or when there's a classroom closure. So all of those pieces really have to be organized in a very deliberate manner, and Aparu allows us to share that information rather quickly and organized with the families as we proceed forward into the unknown.
Thanks. Oh boy. Well, let's turn to managing equity and access relative to remote and flexible learning. And I have 2 questions, and feel free to answer either one. First would be, which systems, approaches, or solutions have you found to support remote education and to evaluate the effectiveness of digital learning so you can best meet the needs of all your students? Or thinking about this a little differently, it seems to me that one of the few positive aspects of the pandemic is that it has made us more aware of the potential for increasing flexibility in the ways that students learn, specifically where, how, and when students engage in school. How are you managing the new flexible learning arrangements? And maybe, Trish, can we start with you this time?
Sure. One of the things we noticed recently, it came up at a staff meeting, we have not had any behavior issues this year. And as we thought about, we have 447 children that are in the building right now, 2 days a week. So we have the A cohort that is here on Mondays and Tuesdays, and then a B cohort here on Thursdays and Fridays. And this will all change at the end of the month, but we really have noticed that being in school 2 days a week, and then on their other days having full synchronous instruction on Wednesdays, and then having a blend of asynchronous and synchronous learning happening on their other remote days, has really worked well for many children. The smaller class sizes have also taken some children who were not always comfortable talking in front of a group of 28, being in a class with 11 or 13 has allowed them to really have voice and to respond in different ways, which has been really wonderful and a silver lining of this.
That's great. Very helpful. Thank you. Tiffany, would you add here?
Yes. So what I think I was going to do like 4C. So what we have found is that with Google Classroom, it provides like evidence of learning for all students. So for me, for like the parents have the resources that they need at their fingertips, like the lessons of videotape for parents to be able to see. One thing that I think I'm really excited about is like how we're able to personalize the learning experiences for students, like using Peer Deck, Jamboard, and now like with iReady, and students are able to, do the assessments, and then they have their own learning path. So when teachers are in a group with students, then they are working on the areas that they have seen a deficit or some gaps. So we're trying to like fill the gaps in without having the teachers have to plan for something else, plan another small group. So we're just really trying to make sure we're targeting students and being as strategic as possible with the resources that we have. I think one thing is, we have dealing with attendance for students. Like right now, there'll never be another snow day in New York City again. So I think just with the students who are absent now, like, you can let the parents know, like, okay, I understand your students are absent. I have a whole attendance team where we're making phone calls daily to figure out, like, why is your student not here? How can we support you? So just reminding them, like, okay, you can see today's lessons on Google Classroom so that their students are not 2 days behind when they come back. So I think in this way, this is how we're trying to approach like equity and access, really just making sure all students have devices. And even when they come back, we know it's still going to be an integral part of the work that we do. So trying to order more devices just to make sure that we have it so they can definitely see this homeschool connection from what we've learned so far.
No more snow days.
It'll never happen again. Get over it. I've accepted it.
It makes sense. Hey, Moses, you started to touch on the flexibility in your first answer. Could you talk to us here about remote learning?
Sure. And I just want to note that I have not gotten over the fact that we're not going to have any more snow days because I'm young at heart, but I have to deal with that. As far as managing our systems and approaches to solutions, and what we found is that this gives us the opportunity, again, to bring students to the forefront with student voice and choice, and to kind of accommodate the current curriculum to their needs, right? We really were able to have that one-on-one conversation. And so we were able to take the fact that we would do office hours for those students that needed the support, again, taking advantage of certain days that we could use, the flexibility between asynchronous and synchronous. And I have to tell you, the one thing I'm proud of is that we were able to train close to 80% of our staff on project-based learning. I don't think that would have ever happened in a regular school year. So again, that flexibility I think is key to us. And the other thing I'll highlight here is listening to students' concerns. A lot of it had to do with having cameras on, and I think we've all heard that, right? The debate about having cameras on, and I do believe that cameras are effective for certain lessons, but for other lessons we had to get creative. And so we asked our students, how can we effectively use engagement in math without a camera? And so we posed that problem. And the students, in collaboration with the teacher, said, we wouldn't mind recording ourselves doing a problem and submitting that so you can see the steps we take. And so what we did then, we trained our teachers to listen to the tone of the student as they were describing that problem, to be able to pick up whether the student really knew what they were talking about in solving the equation, or did they need additional supports? And so we were able to use third-party software to do that. And so giving that flexibility allowed students to participate even more, but also allowed the teacher to be able to really check for understanding for the entire class, because that became an assignment, right? I don't know how you can manage 30+ students on Zoom and check the chat and effectively check for understanding. It's hard in this environment. So finding ways to get creative was one thing that we really capitalized. So again, I was happy about that because then we could manage all students' needs, but on a custom level.
That makes sense. It's very smart, bringing students in and using these technologies to expand how you can work with them. And it really leads us to our final topic, which is about moving forward. And I have two possible questions. I'd ask everybody to answer one of them. The first would be, we know that crisis creates an opportunity. If you had to cite the biggest silver lining from this year, what would it be? What's one positive change you've implemented or adopted, which you'll keep long after the pandemic has left us alone? Or I'd ask you, what's the biggest challenge schools face when it comes to moving on from COVID-19? How are you planning to manage that challenge next year? And let's start with Deirdre.
Okay, so I just want to mention, and I don't think that it's a game changer. Well, maybe it is a game changer, but I think what I'm most excited about is, again, going back to everything happens for a reason, but I believe that this forced a lot of individuals, both students, parents, and staff members, to really embrace technology, to trust technology, to trust their own ability to learn the use of and the implementation of the technology, to for systems, for procedures, and for instruction. So I think going forward, one of the game changers is the use of technology and having one-to-one devices for everybody in the building, every staff member, every school aide, every secretary, teacher, and so on. So that's where we're at right now. Everybody does have a one-to-one device. My hope is that that stays home and we have another device in school so that we can protect the safety of our students that are traveling. So that's where we're at in terms of moving forward. But I think one of the greatest game changers, and I know Moses just alluded to this, is the PD. No longer do we have to cover a teacher for an entire day to allow travel to, coming from Staten Island to go to Manhattan or the Bronx. It'll be a smaller section of the day, less cost to the school in terms of travel, less coverage, and we can do small pieces where the teachers go and try those strategies and come back and report and move from there. I think it'll be more effective having remote professional development. So that, I believe, is a huge game changer.
Makes sense. And in terms of embracing technology, we've come a long way from the days when which we were fighting to keep devices out of our buildings. That's for sure. Mark.
Can I just say something, Phil? I just think it's very funny. I have a large number of senior staff members who did not even text. And now they are so excited to actually text, to have a remind account, to send emojis and memes. And it's just so funny to watch them be so proud of themselves that they took that step forward, and it's impacted their private life in talking with their families and engaging in conversations throughout the United States and beyond, which they never could because they never trusted their abilities to learn it. They just shut down.
It makes sense. The pandemic has caused education to start to move into the 21st century when it comes to technology, and that, I think, is a smart benefit to pay attention to. Mark, how about you?
Sure. So having gone one-to-one 7 years ago, while we experienced a seamless transition once this pandemic began, where we had to grow a large amount and transition tremendously was in how we assess students. So one of the big game changers I look upon and when I reflect on this past year is the journey that we've taken through mastery-based learning and assessment, which was well underway before the pandemic, but this really gave everyone clarity as to why this was necessary and how meaningful the feedback and the interactions were with students, even in this remote setting. So that was an eye-opener and an awakening for many of us along the way. But I guess while I'm not looking forward to yet another Zoom or Google Meet meeting or session in the future, once we could bring back things to more of in-person experiences. I don't want to let it go altogether, because one of the greatest learning experiences we received out of the use of technology in this innovative way was bringing experts and really incredible people into our classrooms. Over the course of the year, many of us binged on Netflix, and lots of series and programs became quite popular, one of them being The Social Dilemma. Through using these streaming technologies, we were able to have at our school an assembly with the director of the Social Dilemma movie documentary, and our students got to conduct, similar to what we're doing right now, this live conference call with the director. And if you want to talk about learning digital citizenship on a very high level, and this was another eye-opener in terms of, wow, we literally have the whole world at our fingertips in terms of bringing experts and people who you'd normally not be able to get to bring into your building due to distance right into our classrooms. So I look forward to continuing that practice moving forward and tapping people who I know would just really add benefit and value to what we're offering in terms of an education.
It's a great way technology can make our classrooms more immediate for our students. It makes perfect sense. Tiffany, in addition to the demise of snow days, what do you see coming down the pike for us?
The demise. Well, one thing I think we have to look at this experience as mirrors and windows. So like, one, to reflect on the practices that we had, or things that, I mostly like to spring cleaning, like what were we doing that really worked, and what do we need to, either start, stop, or continue. So that is some of the work that we're doing with my Reimagine Learning team now, because I think we really have to reimagine learning. I think the biggest challenge is, I explained to the team, I said, it's like we've been given this new car, and we all know how to drive, but we get in and it's stick shift, and everybody doesn't know how to drive stick shift. But we can't approach this vehicle and try to drive it the way we would drive a regular vehicle, because it's different. So we have to be willing to learn something new. We have to be willing to step out of our box. We have to be willing to fail and try again until we get it right, because we're trying to get down this road and accelerate learning. And that's like the ask that we've had. So how do we accelerate learning if we just only going to rely on what we came to the car with? Like, that's not enough. So now that you've opened the door and you've sat in, you realize that, wow, things are different. This is 21st century, and I can't rely on what I only know. I have to learn something different. So I think that will be the biggest challenge, making sure that everybody is coming to the table, understanding that they have to learn something different. And that this year coming up could be an amazing year, and we can all walk away with something new and how we add to our pedagogy, because it's just as much about us as it is for children. So the challenge is to make sure that we're all at the same space and ready to do what's needed to be done for children, and not only relying on, well, I already know how to do that. Like, no, you don't. You know how to drive, but you don't know how to drive this.
Hear that? Questioning what we've done always that we're used to, and making sure that we build to something better. Trish, could I ask you to jump in here?
Sure. I totally agree. The technology has been a game changer, and the biggest positive. For me, another huge positive has been being outdoors. So we originally put up tents in our schoolyard so that we could eat outside even on rainy days. We had a little fiasco where our tents blew up in the air, and we had to have the fire department here to help us out. Thankfully, there were no children here that day, but we've now built outdoor structures similar to many of the restaurants. So we have 5 of those in our schoolyard, and I have a team of volunteers outside right now. And having the children go outside to eat and not be in a really loud indoor cafeteria has just been fun and joyful. We've also closed off one street outside of school, and we use that for recess and just free play, and seeing the children on a daily basis out there just running and playing and laughing, and then coming in to eat in the yard has just been so lovely. And I think that will continue into the future.
That rediscovering the outdoors is a beautiful silver lining here. That's great. Thank you. Moses, you've touched on this already, but what do you think about the challenges or the opportunities going forward?
So I agree with Deirdre about forced to change, but adopting some of these tools for the benefit of their own personal reasons. So I hear stories of people that were able to Zoom with families on special occasions, and they wouldn't have been able to do that had they not been forced to kind of learn. So now things are settled in and they see the benefit. I'll also touch on what Mark said is opening the door to bring people into your space that otherwise may not be possible. And we were fortunate enough this year to partner with Intel, and we're one of the first schools to start an artificial intelligence curriculum this spring term. And I don't know if that would have been possible because of the fact that so many companies tried to step up and say, how can we do this virtually and bring other schools on board? And so across the city, I think many schools have stories to share like that of how people stepped up. So great things happening there. But the challenges I see ahead for us is the fact that we know people were vaccinated, and for the most part, many of the educators were vaccinated in February, March, maybe was the second dose that they received. And if we look at how long this vaccination lasts, it's 6 months. And so my concern is that in September, it'll be 6 months. And so we need to start thinking about what's that booster going to look like, revaccinating going to look like. And I'm afraid that we need to do more of that conversation because that'll impact, I think, the opening of our schools. The other challenge I see for us is programming and scheduling. I can never bring kids back to 100% because if CDC says we need to go from 6 to 3, even 3 does not allow me to bring in all my students, right? So I have 2,300 students. I remember last year when I was on the podcast, I had 22, so I went up by 100. So being able to be flexible and keeping some of what we've learned here is going to be key moving forward. So again, I encourage my colleagues to think outside the box. I don't see us going back to the old ways. I do see us going back to something similar, but with a hybrid type of twist on it.
Yeah, thanks, Moses. And Karen, you started us out. Do you have any final thoughts before we turn it over to Peter?
A few final thoughts. I just want to thank Mark for always being my impetus and my thought partner in a lot of initiatives at our school at Mark Twain. And so we have been engaged in the mastery learning work for a few years now, and we were right at the point of looking at moving from a numerical grading system to a mastery approach. And you know, some teachers were on board and some teachers really struggled on how they were going to do that. And so the pandemic really set us in a position to look at what's important and student outcomes and how we can give them that time and space to really meet those goals that we set out for them. So I had groups of teachers saying, wow, you know, this really gave us a heads up, and now, you know, we're really working and see why this is very helpful. So it certainly helped move a bunch of folks across the line and coming over and really engaging in this work. And really the other piece is watching teachers engage in the potential and the power that they themselves hold in terms of using technology. And I recently had a PPR with my superintendent, and you know, we all prepare for these things and we want them to go best. And I said, how are we going to do this? You know, she's in one place, I'm here. I have kids at home, I have kids in person, and I was just so proud of the staff and the kids, teachers working with multiple screens, live streaming, engaging kids that were at home in breakout rooms with kids that were in person. So I'm super proud that they really took the power that they had and really ran with it, and they believed in themselves. And I know that it's definitely improved the level of instruction here at my school. And I hope that it's going to continue to do so. And just one last thing, I don't know about other schools, but guest Wi-Fi has been amazing for us. So I don't know if you had that before the pandemic, but we just got it, and I'm super, super happy about it because it really frees up devices and access. So that's been a really great silver lining here at Mark Twain.
That's perfect. That's a nice way for end this part of the webinar. We'll turn it back to Peter now.
I just want to thank everyone again for an amazing session and for really being part of this great conversation. I learned a lot, on what products are using and how you're using it, and just some of the innovative ways that you're really supporting your children. And that's just, what we ask from the great leaders in New York City. And we've been seeing this not just from the 6 of you, but from every leader in New York City. But definitely, I think a lot of value will come out of this. There are a lot of questions. We will send, just because we're out of time, we will send those questions to panelists and make sure that they respond to answers. We will be delivering this webinar to everyone who's registered. So if you're here, you will be getting a copy of this session if you want to hear it again. If you do want to reach out to us, there is our information in case you do have questions, or, you need support, or you need additional support, or you want to learn more. We're so excited to continue the work that we're doing in New York City and across the U.S. on working hand in hand with our educational partners. Thank you again for your time today. We wish you stay safe and healthy, and really have, summer's right around the corner, and wish you hopefully a nice, peaceful and restful summer. Hopefully not as bad as it was last summer, getting with all the uncertainty. Thank you again, and appreciate all your time and support. And thank you, Phil, again for moderating this great discussion. Always great to have you as an advocate and a partner to be part of this work. Have a great day. Take care.